Gallery. Welcome to our virtual opening. Thank you so much for joining. We're so thrilled to have this really beautiful exhibit for the month of April and May, featuring member artists Keith Allen, Jim Olson, and Barbara Tyroller. And special guest artists, and also former Frank founding members, that is a tongue twister, Alan Deemer, Judith Ernst, and Jean Lecloose. We're also really happy and feel fortunate to be able to bring this event to your homes, and so we hope you enjoy. I'm sure you are all very well acquainted with how Zoom works at this point, but just as a reminder, we're going to ask that everybody stay muted throughout the event. Again, that's on the bottom left corner of your screen, so if you could just click that to mute yourself. If you have any questions during the course of the event, please feel free to put them in the chat section, which is run by our most fabulous intern, Avery, and she will be able to direct any of those questions. The format of tonight's event will allow each one of the featured artists to discuss their work, and then we'll end with an open question and answer session. You can ask any questions to any of our artists or to the whole group or to me, whatever you're feeling. I'll be walking around and showing the artist's work while they're speaking, but since several of the pieces are going to be behind glass, feel free to log on to our virtual exhibit. You can view that before, during, or after the event. It's going to be up all the time. I'll have Avery drop the link to that in our chat so you can take a look at some of the pieces with more detail. So without further ado, we are going to begin tonight's talk with Keith Allen, and he will be discussing his incredible furniture creations. So I am going to go ahead and pass the floor to Keith, who's here.
As Natalie indicated in the write-up on the website, my work is highly influenced by that of George Nakashima and Gerrit Rietveld. If you aren't familiar with them, you can find the spelling of their names on the website and Google them and probably get more than you really care to know. Briefly, Nakashima was an American who grew up on the West Coast, came east and got an architecture degree at MIT, practiced architecture for a while, eventually went to Japan, came back here shortly before the war, was put into a Japanese internment camp with his immigrant parents. And he was sponsored out early on the condition that he go east by the fellow who he'd hired in the Japanese architecture firm. And from then on, he built furniture in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Nakashima's work stresses natural features of the material and often incorporates butterfly inlays to either repair defects or to decorate the pieces. Rietveld's work is very geometric. Rietveld was a member of a Dutch art movement called Die Stijl. I believe that's the correct pronunciation. It's spelled S-T-I-J-L, and you can Google that and find out what they were all about. Suffice it to say that Rietveld started out as a woodworker, a cabinet maker apprentice to his father. Then he went to night school and became an architect. So it's sort of the opposite of what Nakashima did. But both of these have influenced my work for years, and I'll just discuss a few of their influences. Before I do, let me explain the notion that I call the butterfly yin yang. Most of you are probably familiar with the classic yin yang symbol. What that really illustrates is so-called radial symmetry, where the figure itself has a center point, and if you draw a line to that center point and proceed out from the center, what happens in one direction equals what happens in the other direction. It is symmetry about that point. What I recognized at some juncture was that if I took a couple of rectangular pieces of wood and shifted them slightly, I came up with a square-looking yin-yang configuration. And then it occurred to me, because mainly of Nakashima, that I could butterfly these together. And that gave rise to a whole bunch of pieces that I call Butterfly Yin Yang squared. I'll talk about a few of my pieces now. There's a piece over here called the Big Yin Yang Bench, which is really very Nakashimish. It has a seating surface consisting of a natural edged walnut plank about 8 feet wide, and then 2 uprights. The uprights are trapezoids. I call it yin yang partially because of the architecture. On one end, the wide edge of the trapezoid is up, and the narrow end of the board penetrates that trapezoid. On the other end, the narrow end of the trapezoid is up, and that trapezoid penetrates the board. So there's kind of an architectural yin yang going on here. But that's not a yin yang squared piece. The other pieces I'll talk about are yin yang square pieces, and they're mostly indicated by that designation in their name. Not one of them isn't, but the first piece I'll talk about is what I call the double wide butterflied yin yang squared buffet, and it consists of 2 doors that are shifted in yin yang fashion. Each of the doors is double wide. It's 2 boards that are butterflied together. And the top, again, is long boards that are shifted a little bit and butterflied together. So those 3 forms are butterflied, and various arrangements are yin yang in that piece. That's very heavily reed felt because intentionally the elements, the top and the doors are intended to sort of float in air relative to the rest of the piece. And that's one feature that a lot of Rietveld furniture enjoyed. Second piece I'll mention over there, I call Garrett Joins with the Butterflies. It's a small table. It's basically an abstract geometric sculpture. 2 of the surfaces on it are, in fact, butterfly yin yang configurations. The top is actually 3 boards shifted and each adjacent board butterflied to the next. So it's sort of a butterflied yin yang triplicate. The shelf at the bottom is a butterflied yin yang square, 2 boards butterflied together. And finally, there's a small cabinet that I built that I call Butterfly Yin Yang on stilts. And it consists of yin yang arranged doors. The cabinet box usually interacts with these doors, both on this piece and in the buffet, where one side of the cabinet will overlap the top of the low door. The other side of the cabinet will underlap the top of the high door. So the whole piece kind of is yin yang together. Lastly, I'll indicate that in lots of these pieces, I've used persimmon as a prominent wood. I became enamored of persimmon years ago by a box maker that I met on the show circuit. And he explained to me that persimmon is a member of the ebony family, which explains why it has lots of black markings in it. The center of the tree is very much like ebony, and the center of each branch will be jet black. So these are the defects that I really like. And my attraction to the material was obviously Nakashima. So that's about all I wanted. Oh yeah, I wanted to indicate that at some point I was looking for persimmon. It's not easy to find. I found a big pallet of it down at a flooring company on Craigslist down in South Carolina. So I went down and bought the pallet. It was cut-offs from some other project. And most of the pieces were just a foot or maybe a foot and a half long, and generally 8 inches wide, which is about as wide as persimmon usually gets. I asked the guy who was selling it why he had chopped up most of the persimmon into 1-by-1 sticks, which he had. He was also selling on Craigslist, and he said, Oh, drummers like it for drumsticks. So I guess what I got was anything that was shorter than a drumstick that was left over from that. The only other use of persimmon, or the other prominent use of persimmon I know of, is it used to be used for the heads of golf club woods, but that was before they discovered titanium trees. So all golf clubs now are made of titanium, all the woods made of titanium. Okay, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you so much, Keith. That was your work is so beautiful and elegant, and it has just like a touch of whimsy, and it's really, really beautiful. So next up we have photographer and master, my mask is stuck on my face, I'm sorry, master of gum bichromate photography and printing, Alan Deemer. So Alan.
There is, am I on now?
Yes, you're on.
No?
Yes. You should.
Your own. I see you.
Hey, Alan, you're on mute again. I think you were unmuted, but now. Okay,
How
now you're
about
good.
now?
Now you're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm not a professional Zoomer. I wanted to thank everyone at Frank for asking me to participate in this particular show. The trees is a subject that was an easy one for me to say, yeah, I think I could do that. I say it that way because in general, when I photograph, I'm not really focused on particular subjects. I tend to look more for what fits in the frame of my camera, what sort of light is on that subject, whatever it might be, whether it's pleasing inside of the frame, whether the subject itself is pleasing or not. And then I guess, generally speaking, where I fit in to be able to photograph in my relationship to that subject, can I get to it? Those are the kinds of things I tend to think about when I have the camera in my hand. But trees are a thing, it's a subject that I'm actually pretty able to confidently say, oh yeah, I could do a show with that. And the reason why, and that's, I guess, different than other subjects might be, I come from a family tradition, generations of cabinet makers, fine wood craftsmen, furniture makers, and so on, dating back generations. Every house I ever lived in always had a wood shop growing up, and projects were always going on. In addition, certainly as a child, I found solace in trees when life wasn't going well, or when it was going well. It was a great place to hang out in. But in addition, then, as I got older, I gained an interest in religions of the world, studied them my whole life. And I don't think there's any major religion that doesn't have some pretty great tree stories involved. I mean, just the Buddha under a tree, or under the Bodhi tree, or Jesus on a cross, or that just goes on, the sorts of trees of life and knowledge and good and evil, where it's imbued with it. Our religion is, and whenever specific things like that kind of repeat themselves throughout the world, it makes me, it focuses in for me to another subject of real interest throughout my life, and that's Jungian psychology, That's those an archetype Jung would say is these symbols that rise up from within. In all cultures, all people, trees are certainly fall into that category. And for me, at least, the ideal image for photographing is one that draws people in, reflection and the rest. So that's, I think, just from the start, my whole life, I've always had a sort of reverence for trees. I mean, my studio is called Wood's Edge, for God's sake. And yeah, so these particular images, most of them are fairly new, and they are all the gum bichromate process that Natalie mentioned at the beginning. It's a process I started working with in 1990. I think I made my very first one. It's a really challenging process to learn. There was a good 10 years of, I don't really know what I'm doing, but they're fun to work with. They take hours to make, anywhere from 20 hours, I suppose, for any given print. That works with just the very glue that holds everything together is gum arabic, which is a tree sap from the acacia tree. So I mean, again, just trees are every part of my life. The gum prints are made with gum arabic, this tree sap from the acacia. There's pigments. Sometimes I use, I've used at least even walnut hulls and so on, but mostly I use earth minerals. And then the light sensitive chemical is the dichromate. So gum bichromate is the name of the style of printing. And anyway, I won't talk more about that for now, but it's been for me a passion for 30 years. And yeah, I just, it's a thing that I like to do with my photographs. And I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you for your patience as I switch. Thank you so much, Alan. Your my camera directing and viewing doesn't do justice to the evocative and atmospheric way that you're able to capture an image. They're so beautiful. So next up we have ceramicist Judith Ernst. Judith?
Thank you, Natalie. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
So thank you, Frank, for inviting me to participate in this show. When a number of months ago, when this possibility came up, Barbara Tyroller, who is in the show also, and as you know, is a photographer, spoke to me and said, well, why don't we do something collaborative? And I immediately had an idea for that. So let me start with the piece that I collaborated with Barbara on. And it's about trees, because she was doing this project on trees. And so that's what we did. So Natalie, what I'd like you to focus on, Natalie, is the one called The Forest Within. And what happened with this, so I had this idea, and if I have time, I'll explain how I do all of my pieces, because this is just another sort of version of that. The light isn't great, unfortunately, but so the idea I had was to take one of Barbara's photographic images and then do something I've done in the past with portraits, which is, it's kind of esoteric, but there are old laser printers, because they were used to print checks in banks, that the toner has a high percentage of iron oxide. So if you use those printers to print black and white photos onto special decals that are made to fire onto ceramic surfaces, what happens is you put the decal on the surface and then you fire it at a particular temperature and the decal material and the ink burns out and it leaves the iron oxide. So it's basically a photo transfer technique. So I had this idea to do this with one of Barbara's images, and which I'd done with a whole series of portraits in the past, and I fired them on. But unfortunately, this image, which is of a cypress swamp, it was so complicated, and the sepia result was so, it was too hard for the eye to follow. The eye couldn't really, you couldn't make sense of what was actually happening. So I was a little bit disappointed, but then I thought, wait, what can I do here? Well, several years ago, I had purchased some China paints, which I had never used before. I had planned to use them on a different project that I never did. And those are the paints that, you know, were used to paint little flowers on little teacups back in the day, and then they're fired at a low temperature. So I pulled out the China paints, and what I did was I just used them to sort of colorize very simply the tree trunks and some of the other parts of the image, which again, you can't really see very well in this light. And suddenly it really popped and you could actually see and the eye could follow it. And I'm very happy with the result and the possibilities it opens, because unlike what Alan was talking about with the photographer framing a picture, which is what Barbara does with her tree photos, it's very different than the experience that we all have of walking into the forest. Because when you're walking into the forest, first of all, you don't want to trip. So half the time you're looking at your feet and stepping over branches and so on and so forth. And your head is moving all the time and your sight is moving all the time. And so what happens is that your visual experience of the forest, unless you're a photographer really stopping and looking at things and framing them in your mind, is much more dynamic. And so I think that that's what is captured in, especially this first one that I started talking about. And then there's another thing of it drawing you into the inside, which of course is the mystery, you know, and what happens when you walk into the forest? You know, metaphorically, what are you actually searching for when you go into the forest? And so there are all these resonances, you know, that I think I'm able to kind of capture in a really interesting way with these pieces. The second piece is the same technique, same process. This image I took of a great big magnolia tree at UNC, but Barbara helped me to photo edit a little bit. It's not, well, I mean, it's really interesting also. It reminds me more of a tree of life image. But again, by faceting and breaking up the image the way I've done by cutting up the decals and moving them around, it really changes the way we see the image, and it makes it, in my mind anyway, sort of a more experiential. Now in this, I've got 10 pieces there. There are a few of them that are suggestive of tree-like things. There's one that looks like a big seed pod. There's another one that's called vines. Yeah, that's the seed pod-ish one. Oh, and the one right behind it, Natalie, I call mossy paraderm. Now, paraderm is just a fancy word for bark. And again, the light's not great, but there's actually much more color down, especially in the lower part of the piece. And that's a small piece, but it's one I really like a lot. It's a very elegant little piece. Mossy bark. And then there are some other pieces that I've brought in that aren't really related to trees at all, but they're interesting as well. So I'm not sure how much time I've taken, but I expect that's about my 5 minutes. Is that about right, Natalie? This one I call twining vines. So that's kind of tree related too.
Sorry about that. The colors I think don't translate as beautifully as they do in person, which just is another reason for all of you to come and see this wonderful show in person. The mall's turned off their lighting and there seems to be an ominous storm outside, which is not helping, but incredible is like just a small word to describe how magnificent Judith's pieces are, and what she did with the trees and incorporating that element is just remarkable. They're really, truly outstanding. So thank you very much, Judith. So next up, we have mixed media artist, Jean Lecloose. Jean?
Go ahead,
Does
Jane.
everyone hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great, thank you. My pieces in the gallery right now are part of a series called Night Sounds. And they're really just a celebration of that melody of insects and nocturnal animals that we all hear at dusk. In particular, tree frogs and cicadas and crickets. And so I would say, I think it's 4 out of 6 of the drawings that are in the gallery right now are part of that series. Well, there we go. That first one, Natalie, if you want to kind of go in on it. Oh no, skip that one, the next one. The one with the owls in it. I'll talk about that first. There you go. So when I thought about how to depict this time of night, of course, I thought about dark blues and browns and wanting to somehow have the sounds of cicadas and crickets in particular in the background of the drawing, and then feature some animal or bird in the foreground. So I have this one's particular one is baby owls there. And in the background, you'll see the cicadas and the crickets going around in a spiral. The spiral I chose because of the golden ratio and how we all know about the seeds of a sunflower head, for example, or a shell use that spiral. It's commonly found in nature. So I wanted to sort of mimic that to reinforce the idea that this is about nature and that time of night. So the crickets and cicadas are going on in the background, and they form a circle and along with the branches of the tree that sort of embrace the night sky and the moon there in the center. And I just love drawing trees and branches and vines in particular. And this method of sort of celebrating those night sounds was really satisfying and fun for me to do. If you want to go to that other one, Natalie, yeah, there you go. This is called Family Ties. And really it is just a jumble of vines intertwined and different types of thistles, branches, and 2 hands there. You can think of them as trying to unjumble or trying to weave something to make sense of these vines. And have a little helper there, a tree frog. Again, I think anytime I have a drawing, I like to have some critter in there to animate the drawing and give it another life or additional sound that we can think of when you look at the drawing. And it's gesso on board is the background for it. And then charcoal, oil-based charcoal pencil and Prismacolor to draw into the gesso background. Yeah, so you can move on to another night sound if you want to, Natalie. Yeah, this is another one of the night sound series. Again, it has the cicadas and the crickets in the background. sort of signaling to the viewer that this is about the sounds at dusk and celebrating that sound. And a nocturnal creature that I happen to be particularly fond of, the possum there, featured in that drawing. These cicadas and crickets were made by, I made little stamps out of linoleum and then stamped them on a background and then dusted them with pastel dust. So they sort of blend, but they become uniform in color. So we can see them, but they don't compete with the primary image, which is the possums in this particular case. And if you want to move over to the nesting owls next, Natalie, that'd be great. There we go. This is another night sounds series. It's about nesting owls at this time. And this is more of a white on white treatment of the background. So the paper was white and I dusted it with graphite, so it turned gray. And then I printed the cicadas and the crickets again, and then dusted them with a white pastel dust. And it's really a nice surface to draw on after you do that, because the crickets and the cicadas look as though they're embossed, because when they accept that powder from the pastel, it raises their surface a little bit. So it just adds another interesting feature to the drawing. And then when you draw over them, if you look, it's hard to see with the reflections, of course, but when you go in on those limbs, Natalie, maybe people can see this, you can actually see the cicadas and the crickets sort of shining through the limbs, which is a feature that I really love using these techniques. Yeah, there's another, this one on the bottom, you know, actually I forgot what I called that, Natalie, what is that? Hide and seek, right. I used the cicadas and the crickets in a different way here. They're just trying to create an atmosphere of mystery here. I don't know if anybody else, I'm sure everybody else had a favorite hide and seek tree in their neighborhood. And that's sort of what that's about. There's I used alphabet blocks in the background too, and printed those on the background to sort of give the notion of childhood and games in that particular drawing. Gosh, that went fast. I think I'm pretty much done. The only drawing I had, other drawing I had was in the front, and that might be difficult to get to, Natalie. I don't know. There we go. This is called Three Crows. And it is, again, just a treat for me to draw gnarly trees and textures. And again, animate the drawing there with some crows on the branches. In the background, again, is just random textures and pastel dust, just to break that white plane of a piece of paper to start. Gives you something to work with and build on, and also makes it for more interesting drawing. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate being invited to the show. I think it's just a gorgeous show, and I appreciate being part of it. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Jean, for showing your work with us. It's remarkable, truly outstanding. And the last piece that we saw, again, sorry for the glare. If you go onto the virtual exhibit, you'll be able to see detailed photos without the glass. And again, you can come on in. Also, that last piece that we showed of Jean's won the 2020 Reflections, I believe it was called, juried art show that was juried by Katie Ziegler from the Ackland, and it won. So if you would like to get yourself an award-winning remarkable piece, we have it in here for you. Okay, next up we have Jim Olson, who is here, and he will be talking about his wood sculpture. So Jim?
Thank you, Natalie. In the 1980s, I began to make furniture for our home. And as time went on, I started making furniture on commission basis and for placement in galleries. And through this process, I was enjoying making use of curves, and I thought of my furniture as becoming more and more sculptural. That actually became the strongest interest in making furniture, was the sculptural aspect. So in recent years, I've transitioned from making functional furniture to abstract sculpture. I've stayed with wood as a medium simply because I'm very familiar with its properties. So what inspires me is nature, particularly botanic forms with all their curves. And to generate ideas, I don't make maquettes. I do a lot of sketching, drawing, and the ideas that I have in my head when I'm doing this involve concepts of becoming, emerging, growing. And when I have a form that I'm happy with, ready to make it into wood, and I finish the wood form, then I can think about adding texture and color to enhance the visual interest in the object. So that really has become my vocabulary: form, texture, and color. So I won't talk about individual pieces in the gallery. I just thought I would speak in general about my approach to abstract wood art. Thank you. Natalie, back to you.
Sorry, I'm trying to avoid giving everybody, Jim's a little bit taller than I am, so fix this. All right, thank you so much, Jim. It's been such a pleasure to watch you transform your art and from making these incredible furniture pieces to incredible sculptures. So thank you for that discussion. So next, last but certainly not least, we have Barbara Tyroller, and we will leave the floor to Barbara.
Well, thank you, Natalie. Thank you for tonight and all that you do to keep this gallery running. Thank you to all my artist pals for participating in the show. My special appreciations to Luna Lee Ray for her fabulous curatorial eyes, and the Frank installation team for getting the art on the walls. My thanks also to Gordon Jameson for his precision placement of my text, the voices accompanying the tree portrait. Oh, because these voices cannot be here tonight, I will be reading a few of the excerpts, but it is especially important to me that they are placed in the gallery walls when you come to see the show in person. Thank you to board member Frank Fortner for his technical expertise in facilitating our Zoom presentations. You guys should actually see what he's got set up here. It's phenomenal. Some of you watching us tonight may not know this, but Frank is a collective, and each member artist plays a role in bringing these exhibitions to you. This project, Tree Portraits in the Seasons of COVID, is supported by the Orange County Arts Commission. Now, about the work and how this series evolved, I've always been a portrait photographer, choosing to place the figure in the environment, usually inside the home or workspace, with an assortment of batteries, cords, and miscellaneous light modifiers. The series, Seeing Trees, was born while photographing with former students and now colleagues, Amy Lark, Blythe Devlin, and Kim Moore. As they were capturing the natural world on nature trails that I never knew existed, I just stood by and gave technical and aesthetic critique. Sometime during those jaunts, and particularly when Amy took us traipsing into the cypress swamps off Irwin Road, I caught the nature bug. On one particular neighborhood walk, I found Charlotte swinging on her front yard tree vine. Her mom is a biologist and lover of nature who had converted the entire front and backyard into a natural playground for her children. Charlotte's grandfather had constructed a tree swing under the deck. Putting on her bicycle helmet and her bright red party dress, Charlotte invited me into her world. And thus began a photographic collaboration, partnering the human figure with its tree. Charlotte's mom wrote this passage for me. It's important to me that my child knows that she and the natural world belong to one another. We were shaped over the course of evolution through engagement with the natural world, and our bodies are testament to this close contact. To feel at home and a sense of belonging in the physical world around her, this is the powerful birthright I wish for my daughter to claim. And thoughts from Grandpa. Many years ago, I instructed for Outward Bound. One of the vehicles used by OB was ropes courses, leaping, balancing, swinging high above the forest floor. With their parents, I helped build the means for Charlotte and her brother Finn to begin that adventure, to know the thrill and the satisfaction the outdoors can afford us. Shortly after I completed the Seeing Trees series, I found myself drawn to the stories of the people I photographed and their relationship to the natural world. My neighbor Blythe told me about the transplants in her yard that always reminded her boys of their grandmother's home. That's when I realized that preserving or crafting memories, as garden lovers must do, is exactly what my photography is about. Planting, replanting, gifting, and regifting of imagery. The second half of this exhibition includes 35 socially distanced tree portraits produced during the seasons of COVID. Each participant was asked to find a tree they loved and to submit a story about the experience and memories evoked. I will share just a few excerpts from their responses. I hope you will come into our gallery and read all of the full stories while viewing the portraits. Blythe writes, "It was a sweet moment when my grown son stopped one spring day in the middle of our front walk beneath the bushes that we replanted from my childhood home, inhaled deeply and said, 'It smells like Ma's house.' Ma was my mother who lived in Georgia and had the same gardenia growing in her front yard that is now by my front door. Plants have turned me into a giver as well. It is wonderful to see plants I have shared that are now growing and flourishing in the yards of my friends and family." Our own Natalie Knox writes, "Saying the word daughter makes me happy and fills me with pride. I have wanted to be a mom for as long as I can remember. Getting to share the world and the potential of imagination and mysteries of life in the same way my mom has shown me makes me so excited. Every time I am walking around the outside with my daughter, I knock on a tree's trunk to see if anyone will answer us back. One of the fun things about being a parent is getting to be the conjurer of the mysteries and memories we bestow and create in our kids. Now Violet, almost 2, knocks when she sees a tree." Amy Lark writes a letter to her son. "Dream big, explore often, ask questions, listen, work hard, stay humble, and love yourself. All these I hope for you, my sweet boy. When life seems to loom over you as a shadow of doubt, remember the courage and curiosity of this place. Looking up towards the light among this massive tree and how you can channel the strength and resilience of nature always. Never alone in the woods, home to many souls and disguised connections to our past and days ahead. Look up, see your potential, and know I am always with you." During COVID, I photographed friends, neighbors, my students, my doctor's family, and my beloved pickleball coach, Nancy Frank, who introduced me to her beloved tree. Nancy Frank writes, "There's something about this tree. something that takes me to the first time I met her, love at first sight. Was it the way she carried herself with open and accepting arms and words? The way light entered and moved through her space? Was it how she was grounded in all directions? It was all these things and so much more, strong, stable, balanced, feeling immediate and everlasting peace. I began to understand unconditional love, the gift of sharing with a soulmate. This magnificent tree is a reflecting pool for my memories of her, wonderful memories that fill my heart, encourage me to be me, remind me to appreciate every moment. She is magnificent now and always. Charlotte's, oh, sorry. Artist and community activist Naris Levy writes, I have lived in the heart of this forest on the edge of Carborough for 30 years and am the steward of hundreds of trees and their attendant wildlife. My entire forest falls under a covenant which prohibits the cutting down of trees with trunks larger than 12 inches in diameter. Living in and with nature is both thrilling and humbling. I take my job as steward of the land seriously. Each tree matters, and these beech trees are special. So I want to thank you again for participating in our Zoom reception. The Seeing Trees project was originally slated for exhibition with the North Carolina Botanical Garden. Due to COVID, we've instead provided a visualizing tree workshop at the Coker Arboretum to coincide with the art in the Frank Gallery. We are pleased and honored to be partnering with the garden and hope you will join us in the workshop. You can register on the Botanical Garden website. Note there are only 2 spaces left. Frank Gala 2021 will be auctioning off one of my tree portraits of you and your favorite tree. Information on our gala will be available soon on the Frank website. Call Natalie for more information. Through this journey, I've come to better see trees and to appreciate nature lovers for stewarding the gifts they yield, replanting and sharing with neighbors and family, creating memories and fashioning new stories. In closing, Michael Goy, retired cell biologist turned potter and musician, writes, every molecule in existence vibrates under the influence of its intrinsic thermal and kinetic energy. And when that energy enters our ears, we hear the universe singing. Every wooden instrument starts with a tree. When I pick up a guitar with its fine wooden face, its sturdy wooden neck, and its powerfully braced wooden bridge, I sense the immense acoustic power inherent in its design. And when I coax the instrument to release its sounds, I feel that an ancient tree is speaking through me. Friends of Frank, Michael Goy, and David Cooper of Red Nucleus will be performing live during the 2022 Seeing Trees exhibition at the Botanical Gardens. Please come to our gallery, and thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Barbara. And what a beautiful and moving project. And I feel personally thrilled that I was able to be a part of it. So thank you so much for including me. I hope that everybody gets the time to come and see the exhibit and read the beautiful excerpts from all of the participants. They're also on our website through the virtual exhibit, so you can read them there as well. I will now open the floor to anybody who has any questions. Feel free to raise your hand, throw them in the chat, and we will try to direct them to the artist. So I'll give you guys a few minutes for that. Oh yeah, Jean, somebody was asking what owls you were illustrating in your night sounds pieces.
Okay, well, to be perfectly honest, they're generic, but I can call them barn owls.
They're pretty incredible, whatever owls. I mean, like you can see each like detailed feather of each owl. It's really beautiful. Any other questions? Oh, good.
Question about prices.
Oh yeah, if
Where
you
can
have
we go online to find more information?
which to where?
To find more what?
I'm not sure if I caught all that you said, but where you can go online to find more information. There's many places, but on our website there is a current exhibitions drop down where you can read about all 6 of the featured artists. And there's also in the virtual section in the navigation bar, you can click down and see the virtual exhibit. I do apologize. There's a few on the virtual exhibit that I'm finishing up putting in the information, but all of the pictures are there.
And the website is?
Oh, the website is it's in the chat box. It's www.frankisart.com. And Avery's dropping it in the chat, so you should be able to just like copy and paste it or click from there too. Oh yeah, I hear that, Judith. You want to share a little bit about your process with us?
Yes. So yeah, I didn't really get into the process that I do with all my things, which is quite labor intensive and kind of unusual. What I do is I throw the pieces on the wheel and they're smooth on the outside, like, you know, wheel thrown vessels are. And then I make a grid with horizontals and verticals and a pattern, which is sometimes tessellations and sometimes just an embarcated, you know, leaf-like design, for example, with overlapping shapes. They're always, I do all sorts of different things. But then that's an example of an embarcated design. But then what I do is I cut the top off. And the reason I cut the top off is because I'm going to move the pattern pieces both in and out. So I stick my hand inside and I can push out, and from the outside I can push in. And so if you can imagine this, what I'm doing is, if these are 2 of the pattern pieces, I'm changing the relative angles of the planes in the pattern pieces. So when I do that, I create big gaps in the wall of the piece, and then I fill in with clay both on the inside and on the outside. So what I'm doing is really creating new walls. And that's what gives me the ability to make these very deep relief in the patterns, which you couldn't really get in the same way with carving, just carving. Then when I get it all done from where I've taken off the top, as much as I can move the pieces, then I reattach the top, and then I have to create the transition between the places where I've created this deep relief and then all the way up to the top. But the pattern pieces are getting smaller, so the depth doesn't have to be as great. So they don't have to be as thick. So for those pieces, I attach those on the outside all the way up. I can also carve in a little bit too. So the ins can be carved and the outs can be attached. And then the whole thing is carved. And it's not really until it's carved that you start to really gain a sense of the overall pattern and what's happening. And also, I don't necessarily know when I start how I'm going to move the pieces and how it's going to turn out, because what I'm really doing is I'm doing this 3-dimensional thing, which I can only imagine up to a point. But it then creates a really interesting kind of vessel. I like the vessel form because what I'm trying to do is get the eye to move around the piece and up to the discrete opening. Because a vessel has an inside which you don't necessarily see, but it's a very different feel than a closed form because it's introverted and has a mysterious interior. And so I play with that with some of my imagery, which in fact, the tree thing, the forest within, you know, I thought of how one could do that 2-dimensionally, but the fact is, you'd be going. you wouldn't have an inside to go into or a mystery to go into. So the vessel form really is an interesting way to deal with sort of conceptual visual things. Does that answer your question, Gordon?
And I will say too, if you don't follow Judith on Instagram or social media, I would highly recommend doing that, because she takes these awesome photographs and videos. You can see her work in being made in its, through its process, and you can really wrap your mind around how she works. And we also have a wonderful video of Judith on our website on her artist page too, that her very talented son made. Are there more questions? Okay, Neris, let's see.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank everybody for a great show and a great Zoom presentation. The show is really so beautifully focused. And I have to say, participating in Barbara's project made me really think very carefully about where I live. We spent a lot of time in the forest. We got bitten a lot by a lot of chiggers at one time when we did the summer. But it was really a very interesting photo shoot, having different relationships with different trees. And I think Barbara really got me really thinking about where I live even more. And I'm sure that's going to be true of all the artists in the in not only in the show, but participating in her project. She really helped everybody focus on where we live and, central Piedmont, North Carolina. And I want to thank her for helping me understand more about my environment. Thank you, Barbara.
And thank you, Neris, for that insight.
How did the presence of well, it's a two-way process. So I think Judith talked about when you walk through the woods, what happens I'm trying to think of what Judith said when you're walking through the woods. When I'm with another person walking through the woods, they sort of lead me around, and we sort of inspire each other, and just kind of happens. You can't really predict ahead of time. As a commercial photographer, when people give you an assignment, they'll say, here's what I want you to do, and here's how I want you to do it. This is really different in that you don't really know what to expect until you get there. Thank you.
This is the question about religion and photography. For me, I guess having as a child and then through my 20s, I was always fairly inward looking, and spirituality, those kinds of things were issues of the utmost. Photography has kind of brought me into the world, into a more inclusive sort of understanding of me in that world, which I think is the point of religion, I guess. So on a personal level, there's that for sure. There's also, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but there's some research I've been doing for a dozen or more years on the kind of prehistory of photography, the things that had to happen for photography to become an idea. And something I came across a few years ago is reading some 10th and 11th century tracts written by priests that were concerned about the role of confession and how people see, seeing their sins or whatever. And there was this great emphasis on changing the way that we understand how we see. And obviously interestingly, the link here is that 200 or 300 year conversation that the Catholic Church was having about vision, that was inspired by this confessional thing, ended up, the questions ended up being answered by use of the camera obscura, which, you know, ultimately becomes the camera that any photographer or anybody uses. So there's clearly my own personal interests, academic interests line up both with religion and photography as well. I don't know beyond that what to say, but.
Okay, so Jean, back to you. How does the pastel dust stick?
Okay, Jean, we have a couple questions for you. I don't know if you heard that. How do you get one of the questions is, are there giclées of your pieces? And yes, I am happy to announce that we do have giclées of her pieces, and they are beautiful and they are for sale in the gallery. And then the second question is for Jean, and it's, how do you get your pastel dust to stick?
Okay, well, I think I was telling you that I use these little stamps that I carved to, I literally just put ink on them and then use them as stamps on the surface. And I have to be pretty quick when I do this because the pastel dust sticks as long as the ink is wet. So that's the trick.
Thank you, Jean. And
you're welcome.
How does Jean get such refined detail?
Oh, another question for Jean. How do you get such refined detail? I say pure talent, but.
Well, I was going to say a very sharp pencil.
Yeah.
It's I think the answer is that I just love the draftsmanship involved, the skill involved. It's very meditative and I just love doing it. So the more detailed a drawing gets, the more fun I'm having.
Lovely. All right. And I actually have one quick question for Jim. Thank you so much, Jean. So it's interesting that you call your pieces abstract wood sculptures, because it's like a perfect way to describe it, and not, you know, sometimes abstract wood sculpture, that wasn't a terminology that I would have put together. But how do you get, what inspires like each piece? Are you looking at something in nature and you're inspired, or you're just kind of playing around with a piece of wood and start going? I'm talking to him because he's right here, that's why.
All right. Some or none of all of the above. A lot of what I'm doing is more than doodling, but I'm just kind of exploring ideas. And if I get something that starts to look interesting, then I'll do variations and eventually hone in on a design that actually seems like it might be worth spending the time on.
To keep going on. Very interesting. Oh, yeah, Avery. Thank you, Jim. Just smidgen taller than me.
Judith just wanted to add a quick short statement.
Oh yeah, Judith. Judith has something to add. So please, Judith, the floor is
I just wanted to tell this little story because it just happened today. I was on Instagram and there's a fellow I follow his work. He's from UK and he's an amazing wood turner. And he not only turns wood, but he makes these really detailed surface designs on his pieces and does all sorts of this stuff. And he was saying about this huge piece he'd thrown, that he'd turned, he had started to make the designs. And he said, people ask me how long it takes. And I never know what to say, because I just have an idea and I follow regardless of whether I'm going to charge more or less based on the size or whatever. And it reminded me of a number of years ago in Frank Gallery when I was standing looking at one of Jean's drawings with Eric Fantazos, who of course does these amazing paintings in the kind of Renaissance style that must take forever to do. And we were both looking at this drawing. It was Jean, it was the one of the great big tree. You probably remember this. And he looked at me and he said, you know, she takes it way beyond what's reasonable. And that's where the magic is. So and that just happened today, Jean.
That's so clever and true.
So I wrote this to this guy on Instagram today because I felt there was something similar about what he was saying about what he did with his pieces.
It's true. I mean, you look at I mean, everybody here's work is really incredible, and the show is magnificent. And but yeah, it's remarkable to see Jean's work in the detail here and see it in person. It's just like truly outstanding. So I think that is it, and that is concludes our event. Thank you so much to everybody for joining. Thank you everybody for your continuous support. Thank you so much to our wonderful AV squad, my intern, I call her my intern, to Brand, to all of our wonderful supporters, all of the artists. Again, please feel free to come into the gallery. We are open. We've been so fortunate that we've actually been open since June, 12 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday for walk-in traffic. And you can also make an appointment if you would rather. The virtual exhibit's open all day long, every day, from the comfort of your own home and from your mobile devices. Also, again, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't plug that all of the work in here is for sale. And while the featured artist work is incredible, we also have a ton of other work in here too. So thank you again. Good night and stay dry. So smooth.